Hello everyone, distinguished members of the Chabura worldwide. My name is JJ Kimche. I was born and raised in London. I am now, unfortunately, a resident of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've been asked to share a few words about this Parasha, Tabo. I'd like to begin by posing a question that I think is actually a very strong question, even though it may or may not have occurred to you and is not really discussed so much in traditional commentators. The question is, why is there no mitzvah in the Torah to speak Hebrew? Not only is there no mitzvah, but there is no pasuk anywhere in the Torah, certainly, that ascribes value, either religious or cultural value, to the speaking of Hebrew, to the speaking of the language that would have been native to the ancient Israelites. That seems to be something that is at best optional and at worst completely ignored. This question is strengthened to a large degree by the realization that the speaking of a specific language, i.e. linguistic identity, is crucial to the formation of group identity, both in the ancient and in the modern world. We're very familiar in the modern world with various nationalist movements, most especially the Zionist movement, that were accompanied by a renaissance in language. Of course, the Zionist movement was accompanied by a renaissance in Hebrew, in writing, in poetry, in spoken Hebrew, and many other nationalist movements, whether fulfilled or unfulfilled, coalesce around the renaissance, the rejuvenation of a specific ancient language. But it seems that the Torah passes over this almost in silence. This question actually gets strengthened when you realize that Sefer Dvarim, the Sefer that we are in the middle of, is not exactly reticent to set up very sharp boundaries between the Israelites and the surrounding nations. Israelites couldn't marry into the surrounding nations, they couldn't participate in their rituals, they couldn't participate in a whole host of activities, yet for some reason there is no injunction against speaking their languages, and the speaking of the ancient Hebrew language was not seen to be a priority. This is a very interesting question, especially since we have a pasuk or a story in Nehemiah, in chapter 13, towards the end of Nehemiah, in which the prophet comes back to Judea and castigates the Jews over there for firstly marrying Nashim Ashdodite wives, and moreover for bringing up children that do not speak Yehudit, do not speak the Judean language. Nehemiah is very upset with the Jews who've abandoned their native language. But it seems curious that in the psukim in the Torah and elsewhere in Tanakh, this doesn't seem to be a particular priority, and this does not seem to be a value. However, I want to throw in a wrench into this question, into this theory that is discussed in academic literature quite extensively, by pointing out a couple of psukim in this week's parasha in the Tochacha. Obviously, this week's parasha contains the Torah, which are a series of very frightening curses that are laid at the feet of the Jews just before they enter into the land of Israel. And this comes at a climax of the Torah, in which there described a nation that will come and invade the land of Israel and and conquer the land of Israel and exile the Israelites to the four corners of the earth. And the psukim that describe these invaders goes as follows. So one of the descriptions used is Goy azpanim asher lo yisaf fanim lezakein v'na'ar lo yachon. So this is a ruthless nation that does not favor or does not show deference to older people and does not favor the young. This is obviously a portrayal of a very threatening nation, a nation that clearly is very much at odds with the ethos of the ancient Israelite. They constitute an anathema to the ethos of the ancient Israelites, in the sense that in the Torah you have, of course, v'hadarta pnei zaken, the notion that you have to be very respectful and deferential of the elders, and the notion of teaching the young, of being concerned about the young, of bringing up the young. And this nation that comes from afar and threatens to replace you and to drive you out of the land of Israel, the Israelites are told they are going to be a people who are ethically completely at odds with you. However, there is another description of this nation. It says, Yisa Adonai alecha goy mirachok, miktzei haaretz. This is chapter 28, verse 49. Miktzei haaretz kasher yideh hanesher, goy asher lo tishma leshono. A nation in which you will not understand their language. Now, I find this very interesting and very curious. In other words, this nation, this invader, is granted two attributes. One is a certain ethical inferiority, or certain they do not care to abide by what the Torah sees as very basic ethical norms, which are the heart of Israelite society, that is showing favor to the old and to the young. And they do not speak your language. They are going to force you to contend with a foreign, barbarous tongue, and they're going to exile you to the four corners of the earth, where, again, presumably, you will be forced to encounter foreign tongues, foreign languages. And I think this intertwining of these two characteristics is extremely important. The Torah, threats, the curses that are leveled at the Jews at this point seem to say that the nation that you will have to encounter are barbaric in the initial sense of the word. In other words, the term of barbaric or barbaros in ancient Greek is the term that describes an alien people or an alien person who is exemplified by the fact that he cannot speak Greek, by the fact that he or she speaks in a barbaric tongue, in a kind of an unintelligible alien kind of language. That signifies quite how foreign they are to the Greek language, to the Greek norms, to the Greek way of life, and therefore alien and threatening. I think a very similar process is going on here. The pasuk here is saying that God will place upon you a nation that is very far from your way of life and commensurately very far from your language. I think this intertwining of the linguistic side and the ethical, moral, religious side is not coincidental here. I think this constitutes a very firm piece of evidence that actually, contrary to what might be popular belief, that in the pre-exilic era, way before Nehemiah, way before, already in the times of when the Israelites were entering the land of Israel, there was an emphasis that the language, the Hebrew language, had some special quality. It adhered a very specific quality that was intimately tied into their ethical, cultural, and religious norms, and the ultimate threat was an alloglot invader, an invader which would force upon them a foreign language and also force upon them or subject them to a foreign way of living and foreign values and foreign priorities, and that would be the ultimate threat for the Israelites. And this is something that should very much be in our minds, because many members here of the Chabura, of course, speak or speak a language that is native to themselves, that is not Hebrew, but also speak and read Hebrew, etc. And the connection between the speaking and the reading of Hebrew and the norms and the expectations and the culture and the priority of the Israelites, of the Jews, is something that has a very strong connection that I think is evidenced in these psukim and something worthy of thinking about as we continue on learning together through the Chabura. I wish you all a wonderful Shabbat, and I look forward to much more learning ahead.